The Human Development Index is used to measure the level of development of every country in the world. It was created by the UN, and the three criteria that they use are a decent standard of living, access to knowledge, and a long and healthy life. And these three factors together will determine a country's HDI. The highest HDI is 1.0, or meaning that 100% of the country is developed. This is a topographical map of the country of Niger in Africa. As you can see, Niger has very limited resources, and that's one of the reasons why they have one of the lowest HDIs in the world. In addition to that, they have a low literacy rate, but they have a high fertility rate. So we would consider Niger to be one of the least developed countries in the world, and it doesn't look good for it to develop more within the next 20 to 25 years. A picture of a city in Norway. Norway has the highest HDI in the world, in part because it has a very high GDP per capita. Remember that GDP stands for gross domestic product, and in fact, we're going to review that more in a moment. But Norway is considered one of the most developed countries in the world, as much of Western Europe is, as well as the United States, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. Speaking of GDP, let's take a moment to review it. GDP, like I said before, stands for gross domestic product, and it looks at the total value of goods and services that are produced in a country in a year, but it does not look at money that leaves and enters a country, such as remittances. GNI is very similar to GDP, only it does look at money that leaves and enters the country. The PPP stands for the Purchasing Power Parity, and all this does is adjust the GNI or the GDP to account for differences in the cost of goods. So GDP with PPP is the best way to gauge how wealthy a country is. This is a cartogram, and remember, a cartogram is a distorted map based on data. This is a cartogram showing GDP PPP for 2015. So you can see that the developed countries are really big. The United States, Western Europe, Japan. You can also see that China and India are relatively big. This is because of their large populations. They're able to earn a lot of money for the country. However, this map does not show GDP per capita. Remember, per capita means per person. So this map would look very different if it showed GDP per capita. China would not appear to be that large. But China, India, Brazil, these are newly industrialized countries that their GDP is really growing. Also Mexico, you can see that Mexico is relatively large in the map as well. You can also see countries in Southwest Asia or the Middle East. While they're not huge, they're a little bit bigger, obviously, than countries in Africa. Specifically, Sub-Saharan Africa is pretty small, with the exception of South Africa. Here is a map of newly industrialized countries. Newly industrialized countries are ones whose economies have not yet reached a developed country status, but have surpassed other developing countries. One characteristic of an NIC is that the country is undergoing rapid economic growth, usually focused on what they can export, in particular to developed countries. In many NICs, there's a lot of social upheaval, which can occur in primarily rural or agricultural populations, and those populations migrate to cities where there's a growth of manufacturing. Remember, this is intra-regional migration. So migration within the same region, just from the country to a city. NICs usually share some other common features, including a strong political leader, an increasingly open market economy, so it allows free trade with other countries. And then there are some sort of large international, transnational corporations which have factories or something located in the NIC. You also have a huge rapid growth of urban centers, which makes sense because people are moving from the country to the city. So let's talk for a moment about some of the NICs that we see on the map. You have Mexico, which has a huge amount of manufacturing, oil, but also tourism. Brazil, which you also have manufacturing, but other services and heavy industry. China has a lot of manufacturing, also a lot of high tech industry there, finance and transport. India has manufacturing and pharmaceuticals.